I recently had a case where an individual was ill for a long time, and his mom actually was his power of attorney. She'd acted on his behalf. She obviously loved her son deeply. And after he died, the mom, thinking, hey, this is my son, I'm the power of attorney, actually started giving away his personal property, taking steps to administer his estate. However, his will named a different executor and different beneficiaries who were his minor nieces and nephews. Luckily, it was a good family, and we were able to fix everything that had gone wrong. However, her lack of understanding of her role and what happened after her son died could have very easily led to her being in trouble for improperly distributing assets.
Welcome to the Answers for Elders radio show.
And welcome everyone to Answers for Elders Radio Network, heard across the USA and on your favorite podcast channel and also on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you will see this amazing woman that I am speaking with. Her name is Andrea Lee. She's an estate planning and elder law attorney for Legacy Estate Planning in Washington State. And Andrea, welcome back to the show. I'm always glad to have you with us.
Suzanne, thank you so much. It is always such a pleasure being here. So I'm so happy and glad that we can collaborate like this and hopefully pass a little bit of knowledge on to our valued listeners who are here listening to us today.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that, you know, especially in elder law and estate planning and all the different aspects of end of life, I think the average individual out there really doesn't understand what all is involved. And especially if you're trying to advocate for a senior loved one and all these things. I know that for me, when I was taking care of my mother, I was clueless half the time about what I needed to do, how I needed to act, what my documents meant when I had power of attorney, and all of a sudden she passes away and that's not any good anymore. And so I would love to take this time and talk about, you know, administration after death. This is obviously for whoever is the executor, I'm assuming, Andrea, or the family members, to understand how this whole process works. So would you enlighten us today on that topic?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do want to touch on something you just said, which is when someone steps into that role of, power of attorney, loving daughter or son or good friend, whomever that is, there are so many different hats that they wear when they act as an advocate for their loved one. And that's definitely something we should spend some time talking about. But I do think that many people misunderstand the steps that have to be taken care of after someone passes away. And there's a little bit of confusion about, hey, I was the power of attorney, but mom died. What happens now? What are my roles? What do I do? And what are the necessary steps that an agent has to do after the death of a loved one?
Right. I remember specifically, I was my mother's power of attorney. But after she passed away, she didn't really have any assets anymore. So she didn't really have an executor. But there was a lot of money that I put into keeping her going. And so I had to go meet with an attorney, and he had to sort out, okay, well, the good news is, Suzanne, is you were a debtor to the estate. Or, you know, the estate is a debtor to you, so you can get your money back. But I thought, wow, you know, I never even thought about that, you know, where I had family members that were money grabbing and I was able to get paid back.
Yeah, so that's important. So I think you just touched on something that a lot of people fail to do, which is when someone passes away, one of the first things that you should do, not first, obviously when someone dies, you grieve them. You take a little time to reflect on your relationship with that person and, spend some time grieving your loss. And then the next step really should be sitting down with a competent estate planning and or elder law attorney to answer some questions about the legal steps, the legal requirements after someone dies.
Yeah.
I recently had a case where an individual was ill for a long time, and his mom actually was his power of attorney. She'd acted on his behalf. She obviously loved her son deeply. However, his will named a different executor and different beneficiaries who were his minor nieces and nephews. And after he died, the mom, thinking, "Hey, this is my son, I'm the power of attorney," actually started giving away his personal property, taking steps to administer his estate when she, in fact, was not named as the executor in the will. Luckily, it was a good family and we were able to fix everything that had gone wrong, but that 100% could have caused so much pain and heartache for that mom
Mhm.
who was
Yeah.
not malintended. She was not
Mhm.
trying to create problems. She was not trying to go down the wrong road. She was not trying to do things improperly. However, her lack of understanding of her role and what happened after her son died could have very easily led to her being, you know, in trouble for improperly distributing assets, um,
Right.
without having that ability.
Right.
So really sitting down with an attorney who might just sit with you and spend a little time listening to, what did you do before your loved one passed? Or what are the circumstances now? What are some steps? There might not be any charge for that. Hopefully there's not, but it
Yeah.
really can buy someone peace of mind after their loved one has passed away.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some considerations, I guess, the point, and I remember too, like you hit on really something very powerful because I remember when my mother passed away, so did my support system
Mhm.
because I didn't have the nurse at the skilled nursing facility that where she was at. I didn't have her doctor or her healthcare, people or the executive director or anybody else that I kind of like relied on. All of a sudden, I was in this scenario of, wow, they're all gone.
Mhm.
And I was grieving on
And you're
top of it.
grieving, right? And so
So I'm sure that I'm not alone in that.
no, you're 100% not alone. And having practiced law now for, geez, almost 20 years, I'm going to say estate planning attorneys, most of them are the nicest people I know. I met with a client very recently whose father was an estate planning attorney, and she's aged herself now, and she's facing her aging, she's in her 70s or 80s, and she said, my father said to me that he became an estate planning attorney because he liked and loved people. And
Mhm.
now that I'm aged and I'm working with you and I'm seeing all of my family members and loved ones and friends moving into assisted living facilities or dealing with the deaths of their loved ones, she said, I couldn't understand that when I was a child because I thought he just filled out paperwork. But
Yeah.
now that I'm realizing the humanity of aging and the humanity of assisting family members through the death of a loved one, I've really come to realize that, especially estate planning, different from other laws, really is about caring for your clients. It's really not just checking the boxes of an administration, but being that support system for that individual who has recently lost a loved one.
Yeah. Yeah. We oftentimes, when you're just saying it's just a bunch of paperwork, well, it's the wishes, it's the last
Mhm.
wishes. It's something that's sacred to your loved one that we follow through. There's a deep responsibility with that. And it's sad in many cases that I see oftentimes when I work with families. A lot of times the family dynamics get in the way of the real purpose of those types of things.
Right. And so one of the main reasons you do want to meet with that estate planning attorney
Mhm.
after the death of a loved one is there are significant legal obligations that are thrust upon an agent named in a will.
Sure,
And if
sure.
you start acting in that role, then you're accepting some of those legal responsibilities.
Mhm.
Um, and so the role of that attorney is to guide the executor or the trustee through those legal
Mhm.
requirements.
Mhm.
There are a number of steps that a trustee and or executor have to follow. There are both federal and state deadlines that need to be met.
Mhm.
There are obligations they have to fulfill. There are notices they have to provide. And most people will act as an executor or a trustee a handful of times in their life, once,
Yes.
twice, maybe a few more. And they just don't have the time to actually learn all of their obligations. So a
Yeah,
good estate
true.
planning attorney should be able to sit down with an executor or a trustee and then hold their hand through an entire administration.
Mhm. And it's interesting, Andrea, because like when my mother passed away, we had prepaid her cremation.
Mhm.
And that was great. You know, the company came, they picked her up, they prepared her, remains, they took her away. Of course, that was emotional. And but here was the thing that was interesting. The next day, because obviously death certificates and things like that show up, the very next day, we I get a phone call from, I think it was King County or whatever, and they have a attorney that goes to King County courts
Mhm.
for permission to cremate. Well, that was not prepaid in her, so there was a special tax that I had to pay. And that was just threw me off because I didn't even know, and I didn't know who this person was. Had I been better equipped, I wouldn't have been. I remember it throwing me into a tailspin, like, who is this guy and why do we have to do this? And it was because she had um she was live in Snohomish County, and they don't have that requirement. So,
Hmm.
or at the time, they didn't. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still that way now, but this was back in 2011. So obviously things change, but I remember that. I remember how I thought, like, wow, I guess it isn't all taken care of.
Yeah, that's surprising. I haven't heard anything along those lines, and my mom passed away, as you know, last month. She was
Yeah.
cremated as well, and pretty positive we didn't have anyone or need any permission to arrange for that cremation. But, I do tell my clients, I have been doing probates, trust administrations, and similar work for about 20 years, and I
Mhm.
still learn something new nearly every single day. Almost
Yeah.
every day, something crops up that I've never seen before, or a bank is requiring a form I've never heard of. Something crops up. But you know what? That's my job, is to help people solve these problems and figure it out, even though I might say, I've done thousands of these and I've never seen this, but now it's something new. And then we just cross those bridges as we get
Yeah.
to them.
And I'm sure that these things happen all the time, you
They do.
know, where we thought we had it all taken care of, but there's this and there's that.
Mhm.
And but I just remember feeling like, wow, what did I miss? How do I need to fix this? And I just, it was a little thing, but it was a big thing at the time because I was an emotional basket case in many cases. I was kind of in
Mhm.
a fog. There was part of me that had been through this ordeal that, every day my mom was on my shoulders, literally, or, you know, metaphorically. And I felt like, wow, there's all these different things that we have to consider. So we have a trustee.
Mhm.
Trustee would be for a trust, and then obviously attorney helps to identify who the beneficiaries are, things like that, or if it passes on or whatever that is. I know there's different types, and Steve, your colleague has gone through those. So and obviously an executor. How does the trustee and the executor, what's the difference?
So when someone creates their estate plan, then they typically will create a will. And in your will, you would appoint an executor. And the executor is an individual who would go to court. They would petition the court to be appointed to manage a decedent's assets that are subject to probate. So
Hmm.
a lot of people in the state of Washington do not create trusts, and that's okay.
Yeah.
What that means is when they die, if they have enough assets where probate is required, the executor named in their will would usually hire an attorney. That attorney would go to court and they would ask the court to actually appoint that individual as an executor.
Right.
Because your will is just nominating an executor. It's
Hmm.
saying, this is who I would like to act. But the
Hmm.
court has to conduct an investigation to make sure that person is competent and able to
Sure.
act. So
Sure.
that the executor is appointed in a will and through a court.
Right.
Some individuals, in addition to having a will, create those revocable living trusts. In your trust, you would appoint a trustee. The
Right.
nice thing about that trustee is when someone dies, there is no court appointment necessary. typically.
Interesting.
Things can go wrong, but if everything is done properly and if the sun and the moon align and everything has gone perfectly well after the individuals created that plan, if they have a trust, we frequently do not have to go through probate. And what we're able to do is the successor trustee just steps in and fulfills that role as soon as the trustor or the primary trustee passes away or becomes incapacitated.
That is really good to know. And obviously, if people have questions, they can reach out to you guys. And it's the website for those of you listening is www.waltar.com. And Andrea, you are reachable there, I believe, as well.
I am. Same address, www.waltar.com. And I would love to hear from any of our listeners in the state of Washington who have any elder law or estate planning questions or concerns.
Fabulous. And Andrea and I, we're going to be right back right after this. Did you know that you can discover hundreds of podcasts in our library on senior care? So visit our website and discover our decision guides that will help you also navigate decision making. Find us at answersforelders.com.